we're in this series called Tug of War. And I think it's a fitting series for the world that we live in today, because when you look around, you can see plenty of war happening. There's war between Apple and Android, between Bucks and Dutch, and I know this is how it works. If I were to call it Dutch Brothers or anything other than Dutch, I sound like I'm old. And if I just call it Bucks like I did, then I'm old. And so as it turns out, I'm just old. You know, there's war between Chick-fil-A and Cane's. But on a more personal scale, we have our own daily tug-of-war battles, don't we? Do I matter, or am I just here? What about this one? Does anyone care about me, or am I all alone? How about this? Am I happy with the way that I look, or am I just a hot mess? You know, we're not foreign to the idea of tug of war in our lives. And in fact, in the first century, there was a group of Christians that made up the people in Colossae, this awesome city. I want you to repeat that city name with me, Colossae. Everybody say that out loud, Colossae. Well, they were facing a tug of war against their culture, and the culture believed very differently than the Christians did. One of the pervasive philosophies, I'll stop for a second, because philosophy is a fancy word that is like a way of thinking. And one of the pervasive ways of thinking or philosophy was making its way through the church. It was called Gnosticism. Isn't that a cool sounding word? Gnosticism. I want you to say that word with me. Say Gnosticism. Well, the basic idea was that the knowledge of God was supreme and above a relationship to Jesus. Okay? Like the knowledge of Scripture and of life was the goal, and the more learned you were, the more godly or spiritual you were seen. A little snooty, isn't it? Let me illustrate it like this. It'd be like you saying the best way to be an athlete is to just watch the sport and never actually play the sport. You think that was crazy, right? Or the best way to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend was to go through the magazine aisle at the store and look through one of those teen magazines, and there's an article in it about how to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or just basic information that you can Google about a guy or a girl, and that's how you're going to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, rather than, and this is crazy, actually getting to know one. Yeah, it would be like that. It wouldn't work. There was a game of tug of war taking place in that day. It was Jesus versus Gnosticism. And this became a huge problem in the church. Why? Well, first, because not everyone had the ability to read. Not everyone had the means to learn. So there was an intellectual superiority that was taking place, kind of a false sense of righteousness. You ever met someone that's like that? I think sometimes Christians, all Christians, can be like that. And secondly, it was opposed to what the Bible was actually teaching, and it was threatening the gospel, the story that Jesus was living out when he was on earth. And the gospel is the story of God coming to us to offer a relationship, not to earn his approval through knowledge. So, Paul wrote in his letter, and this is a cool letter that he's writing from prison, in part to address this false ideology. And so I'm going to have you read with me. This is out of the book of Colossians, chapter 2 is where we're going to land tonight. Chapter 2, verse 2, and I'll read this here. It says, "My goal is that they meaning Christians, may be encouraged in," I'll have you read along with me, "may be encouraged in heart and united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ." What a powerful beginning to this chapter as he's trying to get them all to zoom in on this one goal. Paul's goal was to communicate one idea. It was this: for Christians to know and trust Jesus. Not just to know about Jesus, but have an authentic relationship with Jesus. So for Team Jesus, Paul was arguing that a real relationship with Jesus Christ is all we need. But for many Christians, Gnosticism was winning the tug of war battle. Christians, in fact, were walking away from a relationship with Jesus because under that philosophy, it wasn't necessary. It was about knowledge. Okay, you might be thinking, what does Gnosta something have to do with us? Well, understanding Gnosticism is not really the key. What is important is understanding any philosophy that stands against Jesus and his way. What philosophical tug of war do you think we face today? Let me break down a tug of war that most of you will face while you're in high school and beyond. It's Jesus versus opposing worldviews. What worldviews? Well, hang with me, a couple big words in here. Here are a few common worldviews that make their way into all of our lives somehow or another, and I bet you've come face to face with these, even if you didn't know it. Number one of the worldviews that we come to battle with is atheism and agnosticism. And I lump those two together because they have some similarities even though they are different. And the atheism is this belief that there is no God. God does not exist in the basic form. And then agnosticism is there's really no way of telling if there is a God. So, those are the basic ideas of them. But have you ever wrestled with those philosophies? I think it's normal to think critically about how we arrived on earth and how we, what we're supposed to do while we're here and where did God come from. But these two worldviews have come to the conclusion that we're here accidentally. And because of that, you've got all types of implications that we have to think about with life. The second set of worldviews is moralistic therapeutic deism, which sounds wordy, doesn't it? Moralistic therapeutic deism. Say what? Okay, there is a God, but all that matters is that we're good people, right? We're going to live our lives however we want and try not to commit any major atrocity. That is a very, very popular worldview that exists today. At the end of the day, it's like, you don't need church, you don't really need Jesus, because all the religions are probably the same anyways. So the only thing that really matters is that we're just good people, and we try to stay out of trouble, keep our nose clean. That is moralistic therapeutic deism. And then the third one, and last one that I'll leave you with tonight, is called existentialism, which is another gigantic word. I'll break it down like this. The basic idea with this is that you determine the purpose of your existence. And this is so popular today as well because we live in a world where we all want to be in control. We want to determine and define all the factors of our life. And believe me, there are more than these, okay? There are tons. There's naturalism, and there's nihilism, and some other isms in different religions, and more than I have time to share with you today. However, it's worldviews like these that Paul wrote this warning to Christians. And if you aren't a Christian, this is still going to be true for you. I want to read for you a verse that Paul wrote in the same chapter, verse 8, and you can follow along with me here as well. It's a powerful passage that Paul writes. He says this, "See to it," and I need to stop you for a minute, because what he's telling you here is if you're reading this, if you are a believer, if you're a Christian, wake up a little bit. You need to take action. You have to see to it and take responsibility for what he's about to say. This, see to it that no one takes you captive. That no one takes you captive. And the word captive is this cool combination of words that basically means don't let anybody kidnap your mind. Don't let anybody come in and like creep in and steal your ability to think rationally. And then it follows with this. Through hollow and deceptive, which is a word that just means empty. Like, don't let anybody come in with these empty philosophies, which depend on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. The elementary spiritual forces of this world, he puts that in there because these believers, these Christians, were kind of being fooled into angelic worship and all kinds of traditional worship that really had nothing to do with Jesus. And so, if you can sort of sum up what Paul is writing here, it's this. It's like, hey, believers. If that's you in the room, you identify as a believer, it's this. And I even think that if you're not a believer, this would still really make sense for you. Think about what you think about. Okay? Don't just think about things. Think about what you think about, what you're taught at school, what you're reading. I know, this is crazy. Think about what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're listening to, and whatever fills your mind. And listen to this. This is the key. Don't allow anyone in any way to convince you to depend on anything other than Christ. You hear that? Here's the question then. And I want to leave you with this and lead you in this time for your discussion, your groups. What is currently or has the potential to wage war against your faith? What worldview or ideology or concept has the ability to creep in and kidnap your faith and steer you away from Jesus? Well, let me encourage you with this. Listen, I know it's easy to look around and feel like the average teenager is not remaining committed to Jesus. And tons of people, maybe even you or your friends, are walking away from the church. And this is the struggle that we're in. This is the tug of war that seems at times to be a losing battle. But listen to me, students. You don't have to be defeated in this battle. You can stand your ground. Because remember, like last week, Jesus stands with you. You can win the fight. You can live out your faith, but you have to think about what you think about. See to it that no one takes you captive from trusting in Jesus. Let me pray for you. Father, I pray that you would help us to open our minds to your truth, to be aware of the dangers that are around us that invade our belief and our understanding and our faith in you. Pray these things in your name. Amen.